All right, Zach, how did you come to identify as bi?
Wow. So it seems like such a simple question that actually is a little more complicated. But I was struggling with my sexuality for a while, and I had my first hookup with a man when I was freshman year in college, and I was very drunk. And after it happened, I wasn't really sure if I enjoyed it. And it was just because I was so in my head and I was so drunk that I couldn't do it. I remember speaking to a few of my gay friends being like, hey, I did this. I'm not sure if I'm into it. And their responses were, it doesn't really sound like you're gay. Like, I feel like you would have been more into it than you were. But then I kept on getting blackout drunk and hooking up with men for 5 years. And that's pretty fucking gay. But the thing is, at the time I was doing this, like bisexual visibility was really at its early days. And I remember Googling potentially that I might be bisexual my sophomore year of college. And what came up were pretty much only stories about bi men having or spreading HIV, research associated with that. And then every single man who I knew that identified as bi in college shortly after came out as gay. So while I am egocentric, I'm not delusional. I'm like, I can't be the only guy in the world with a bisexual orientation. But the thing is, there was little bisexual visibility online, little articles about bisexual visibility. I had no in-person interaction with bi people, but it was confusing because why do I keep getting drunk and hooking up with men? And during this time, I'm also dating and loving women as well. It wasn't until after college I saw a therapist, and he was like an LGBT specific therapist. And the fact that I sought him out obviously means something. On our second session, after I was going like kind of launching into this monologue again about how I'm so confused and I like seem to hook up with guys and girls, he pauses me and he goes, Zach, I'd like to be blunt with you. I said, please. He goes, you seem very clearly bisexual. Is there something I'm missing? And I was quick to respond, oh, that shit doesn't exist in men. And he responded, Zach, you're too smart to think that, which I thought was honestly one of the best responses he could have given. And then when he almost granted me permission to be bisexual, or like kind of elucidated that like bisexuality is an option, kind of to borrow from Fritz Klein's language, like I was very quick to take it, and I felt it really resonated with me. It really spoke to my identity. At first, I thought I was bi-sexual and heteroromantic, meaning I was physically and sexually attracted to all genders, but could only date and love women. That was actually a little bit of internalized biphobia I needed to get over, and eventually I admitted to myself and realized that I'm attracted both physically, emotionally, romantically to people of all sexes and genders.
Really is great to have a therapist who can cut through the shit, isn't it?
That's actually why I sought him out. I need direct advice. I don't like when a therapist says, what do you think? I'm like, I have anxiety and OCD. I've thought about this 10 million times over. I need an outside perspective and I need someone to break the loop. And so I was like, I need you to be extremely blunt and direct with me. And the fact that you were an attorney for 20 years before transitioning into being a therapist is part of the reason why I'm going with you specifically, which I think allowed him to be more direct in a way that maybe most therapists would not tell a client what his sexuality is.
What has your experience been like being out as a bi writer?
For the most part, good. I think I was really one of the few bi writers. I started writing about 8 years ago. And the first piece I wrote was for XO Jane. And it was one of their like, it happened to me pieces. And it happened to me. I came out as bi and can't date anyone, gay or straight. And I spoke about the struggles I had dating straight women. They didn't want to date me because they assumed I was using gay as a stepping stone and I was going to leave them for a man. And then the gay men I dated were just extremely condescending. They'd be like, oh, honey, I was bi too. You'll get there. And then they like moved and tried to kiss me. And I'd be like, fuck you. Like, that's wildly condescending. Do not kiss me. Do not talk to me. Yeah. Then I fell in love with this bi woman. And it was just so nice. And I felt so loved and supported. And they really supported my femininity. They really supported my attractions to men. They were turned on by it as opposed to being threatened by it. And we had this really healthy relationship for a little over a year. And when I wrote this piece, it went viral. And it was because at the time there was such a dearth of bisexual articles and visibility, but also the bisexual articles that were out were catered to monosexuals. So it was convincing gay and straight people that we exist, or it was 10 things to never say to a bisexual person, or 15 myths about bisexuality. It wasn't actually bisexual content by a bi person for a bi person.
A listicle for the curious and less for us talking to our own community.
Yeah, exactly. And it was just like their unique struggles that come with dating. That as a bisexual person, I addressed those issues. And then from that, I got work, like just writing about bisexuality. And I really wrote for this community talking about internalized biphobia, how to date while bisexual, how to find a bisexual community, just things I hadn't seen online, and a lot of questions that I specifically was asking myself and others and didn't see answers to, and really went out and found those answers and started reaching out to the community and addressing these issues. I love being a bi writer. I love the fact that I really feel like I'm actually helping people and helping people embrace who they are and live a happier and more fulfilling life. And so I really do love that aspect of my job. And I have to remember that aspect of my job when I'm getting hate, when I'm getting vitriol, when I'm dealing with a lot of, okay, what is the reason why I do this? And coming back to that.
How do you see yourself as a writer, and how does being bi fold into that? Is it all encompassing, or is it just a vantage point?
For a while, it was all encompassing, and it no longer is. I think for a while it very much like was, I am the bisexual writer. I'm speaking to bisexual issues. Everything is not just going to be through a bisexual lens. It's going to be like bi. Not to quote NSYNC here, but like
please always quote NSYNC here. This is a safe space for quoting NSYNC.
And then for a while, like I realized that like being bisexual is just one aspect of my identity, and of course it shapes how I see the world. But I also don't want to be just the bi guy. And I feel like this vantage point, being bisexual, can actually help gay people, can actually help straight people, because I do see the world slightly differently. And so I was limiting myself by literally only speaking to bi people and then only writing about bi content. But that said, as you asked, like it definitely does inform my perspective. And I'm very happy about that and proud about that. I don't want to sound corny and say unite the world, but I really think can help people realize that maybe we're a little bit more similar than we give credit for.
So how did you come to write for bi.org and Queer Majority?
I think it was a natural progression. You know, I was given a platform where I could really delve into nuanced bi discussions. I think one of the things that I really struggled with as a bi writer was writing a lot of 101 introductory content or writing SEO type content. But with bi.org and Queer Majority, I was really able to delve into specifically a lot of these issues that bisexual people face that I wasn't allowed to kind of do that 201 or 301 content for other publications. So I really enjoyed writing for these places. Like it really gave me an opportunity to write in depth in a way that I was not given at other publications.
So you've written 2 successful columns for those sites, Goodbye Love and Zach in the City, respectively.
Yeah.
How did you come up with those vantage points? And what is it like being a real life Samantha Jones?
It's Samantha Jones. Thank you for not calling me a Carrie Bradshaw, which is what everyone says when I say I'm a sex writer.
I would never. You're very cute, Samantha.
Goodbye Love was awesome. That was, I think it ended a couple years ago, but like I was talking to the editor-in-chief at the time, and like at some point, I think I maybe wrote like 100 articles about bisexual identity. And there's a lot to say about bi identity, but around 100 articles in, you're like, okay, I'm really starting to rehash certain pieces here. But it really allowed me to explore every single aspect of bisexuality that I possibly could, whether it was dealing with biphobic parents or internalized biphobia, how to respond when you're on a date and someone says something biphobic, how to find bisexual community, when to address your bi on dating apps or on a date, like just when can you call yourself bi, you know, at what point, like the infighting between the bisexual and pansexual community, the like just a million. I mean, this is all topics that I thought of off the top of my head, but that in tenfold. So I really was able to do this. And I think the impact has been huge. I really hope so. And I know bi.org still shares a lot of the content now, which I appreciate and love. Like, I really delved into everything. And with queer majority. So Zach in the City, that's just been fun. It's very different, right? Like, obviously, that's one of those columns, for example, where I'm writing through a bisexual perspective, as opposed to bi.org everything was about being bisexual. So this almost shows an evolution in my personal journey as a bisexual writer, is more reflective of where I am now. And with that, it was more about, I felt like very much like an it girl, as like the name of the column kind of suggests, right? It's about me going out into the city and kind of my various experiences about how I'm able to live my life with sexual autonomy and without sexual shame and with sexual freedom, and how I'm able to kind of get to that point and the experiences I have now that are so rewarding because I've been able to get to that point. So it's a really nice arc in a sense.
With your writing over at Men's Health, including the advice column Sexplain It, your work takes on a decidedly queer vantage point. Is that by design? Do you have any advice columnists you take inspiration from?
Yes, that is absolutely by design. It is, I think a lot of it is also I'm answering the questions that people ask me, and I have a lot of queer followers. And then all of a sudden, so I was initially answering the questions that like people who only knew my work were asking, and then it almost got the reputation of a queer column. So then people started writing in, but I also think I'm better equipped to handle queer issues in a way. I also feel like I'm having a much larger impact writing about queer issues at Men's Health than when I used to be an associate, like a low-level associate editor for like Out Magazine and The Advocate, where I'm able to reach people who don't feel comfortable going to bisexual.org or queer majority, because it has bi in the name or queer in the name. But these men are definitely struggling with their sexuality. And all of a sudden, if it's on a site that they read, they're more likely to click. So I'm actually having a larger impact reaching closeted people, reaching people who don't feel comfortable, searching for bi content. And that is pretty awesome, writing queer content for a straight publication. The sex columnist I take, of course, Dan Savage. Give credit where credit is due. That man is a legend. I know some people get very frustrated because he potentially said some biphobic things however many years ago, which he has since apologized for. And now if you listen to his podcast, how much he's helping bisexual men is incredible. And I think all we can ask for with someone is to learn from their mistakes, which is exactly what he did. And now he probably helps significantly more bi people than I do, just because he has such a larger following. You know what I mean? And always in his podcasts and in his columns, he specifically is addressing the issue of bi people of all genders. So I absolutely love that man. I took a lot of inspiration from that man. He is on the cover of my book. Literally, it says Zachary Zane is one of the best sex writers working today, which is a quote from him.
Over at Cosmopolitan, you've just begun a new column, Navigating Non-Monogamy. Do you feel like ethical non-monogamy is becoming a more popular relationship structure? And what do you hope readers can learn from the mistakes and stories you tell there?
I think it absolutely is becoming a more popular, or at least more interested relationship structure. It's becoming more valid. I know we're seeing just like the amount of non-monogamy content that's come out in the 5 years is like insane. Every single publication is writing about it. Truly, New York Times to Men's Health to Cosmo, doesn't matter. If you are a lifestyle or culture magazine, you have hopped on this train and are writing about it. The reason why I pitched this column is honestly almost similar in a way to bi.org, like going back to it, where it's like a lot of the content right now for non-monogamy content is 101 content. It's how do I navigate jealousy, or how do I open up my relationship? There's obviously so much more to non-monogamy than navigating jealousy. Now I know how to handle my jealousy in a non-monogamous relationship. That is not an issue I struggle with at all. I struggle with plenty of other things, but they're not being addressed or discussed. And
how to take care of your Google Calendar?
Right. When I pitched it to them, I was like, I want this column to start with how to open up your relationship and then to address all these other things. So for people who have been poly for 6 months, a year, who know how to navigate jealousy, there's still plenty of other issues. And like, I want to also give advice for people who are relationship anarchists, who live with their boyfriend, their boyfriend's wife's girlfriend, whatever their relationship dynamic is, and speaking to them. So I think right now we're at this heyday of non-monogamy. There's more interest, but still it's very geared towards people who are just starting out. And I'm really proud of myself. And I'm glad that Cosmo took a chance on me and let me do this column where I'm actually speaking to people who have a good sense, perhaps a good sense of non-monogamy, but they're still struggling with it in many capacities, the way that we all struggle with our relationships in many capacities, regardless of your relationship orientation.
Other than writing about sex, love, and relationships, are there other subjects you would love to write about? If so, what? Or is that just it? Are you just a one-trick pony, Zach?
No, I've been thinking about this for a while. I'm excited to kind of move into fiction for writing books, which was initially what I thought I was going to do when I became a writer. And then kind of this whole detour happened with that viral piece. And then I totally forgot about that. It's not like I'm going to be like writing like World War I historical fiction. Like it's still going to be like queer and bisexual and polyamorous. It's just not going to be directly about me. I'm excited to kind of tell different queer stories that we haven't yet seen, because I think there are so many that deserve to be told, some of which haven't happened to me, but I know they exist in the larger sphere. So I'm excited to kind of share those stories. It's tough. You really do get pigeonholed in a sense. I'm lucky in that like now I'm not as pigeonholed and I can literally talk about anything sexuality, anything masculinity, anything LGBTQ. So I have a pretty large beat that I cover. I was interested in being like, what if I started writing more like thought pieces on Judaism? I know it's such a divergence, but I've been like more connecting with my Judaism in a way that I kind of steered clear from it for like a decade. Again, I don't know if I want to do that, but it's been something I've been thinking about. But yeah, I don't know exactly where it's going in terms of like essays, where it's going to go, but I'm focusing more on fiction, and I'm really excited to start writing novels.
Tell me about the genesis of Boy Slut, a Memoir and Manifesto.
I wrote Boy Slut because I hadn't seen the book written. You know what I mean? Where it is a lot of, I've read God knows how many gay memoirs right now, just in general, because I like them. And then in preparation for writing this book, and now I actually think I could maybe never read a gay memoir ever again, or my head might explode if I hear the phrase authentic self one more time. There were a lot of the similar stories, and these stories were not my story. It was often a little gay boy from the South who grew up in a Christian family, gets kicked out of his family for being gay, moves to New York City, finds his chosen family, lives happily ever after. And I hope I'm not shitting on those stories. Those stories are absolutely important and necessary, but they're not my story. I had never seen a book written openly by like a bisexual man about their journey to bisexuality. And it's about a bisexual man about how to overcome sexual shame. There are all these gay memoirs. I haven't seen a bi memoir. And that's why I was really inspired to write this book, especially because I do receive a lot of feedback from people saying how much my story has changed their life. I'm like, you're only getting a small section of my story. Just what you get is from that 1,000 words that I wrote about. But I haven't written about my childhood. I've written a little bit about growing up with OCD, but very little, all things considered. So you're really getting all of me in this book in a way that, especially if you were bi, I think would really resonate with you. Although I do want to clarify that this is not just a bisexual book. I went through painstaking efforts to make sure that was not the case. Of course, I think if you are bi or pan or queer, I think it might resonate slightly more with you, but like I really made sure this book is for people of all genders, all sexual orientations, anyone who's experienced sexual shame, and spoiler, we all have. But again, I'm using my perspective and my vantage point as a bi person to tackle and unpack all this.
We've been friends for years, and there are things in there I didn't even know about you. So it really is very confessional and call to arms, and I appreciate that.
Thank you.
You're welcome. You have a recurring theme of using footnotes as a comic relief throughout the book. How did this come about?
Originally, they were not footnotes, but what would happen is I'm someone who uses a lot of comedic relief. I like adding levity, not in a way that undercuts the story, but I think that gives you a moment to breathe and to process. You know, if something serious is happening, I'm not going to throw in a throwaway joke just to break it up, but sometimes I think, okay, this is a pretty intense moment and I want you to be able to breathe. And so I originally had them throughout the book, not as footnotes. And my editor loved them. And he was like, I really think your humor is often what carries the book. So include them. But I was like, I sometimes feel like it's might be breaking it up. And I was a little worried about that. So by having it as a footnote, I'm able to be like, okay, if you want to read the footnotes, you absolutely can. If you want to stay in the thick of it and do this, you can. So it's almost like a choose your own adventure in a sense.
Yeah, keep a choice of either going with the flow or taking a moment to get some fresh air. I appreciated that as a reader.
It made reading the Audible quite confusing because I wasn't sure how to incorporate these footnotes. And so what I did was actually in the Audible, I didn't include some of the footnotes. You can't have like an option of like, do you want to read the book with footnotes or not? It's just like one book. And I'm like, okay, actually this might undercut what I'm saying. And as I'm reading it out loud.
You did let your social media followers in somewhat on the process of reading your book. What did you have to fight to read your own manifesto? What was it like doing that experience of telling it in an oral tradition for you?
I did not. I think it was almost the opposite. I did not want to read it. And I realized how challenging of a process that is, even as someone with a musical theater background, and someone who reads, quite well, but reading it out loud is quite challenging. First of all, your voice just gets sore, but like I'm someone who's an over planner, and you can't, like if I'm preparing a monologue, let's say for an audition, I can plan exactly how I want to hit every single word because it's only 10 minutes long. I cannot go through the entire book and plan exactly how I want everything to land. So it's something that only comes with experience. And I remember while doing the process, I was a little frustrated because like around chapter 10, I'm finally getting into the groove. And she starts giving me notes being like, hey, sometimes you do XYZ when you read this way. And I'm like, why are you telling me at chapter 10? You should have told me this from the beginning. And she was like, Zach, you were so anxious that if I give you any more notes, I feel like you would have I'm like, okay, that's actually fair. Usually for memoirs, they want you to read the memoir because they want your voice. There was a joke in my book proposal when I'm like, oh, when Jon Hamm reads my memoir, the book is sold separately. So Abrams has the print rights and then Audible has the audio rights. And then when Audible was interested, they're like, hey, so we saw like in your proposal that you mentioned Jon Hamm for reading your book. Like, is that something I'm like, wait, I was kind of joking, but can he actually do it? They're like, well, he has read Audible. And my agent was on the phone. She's like, Zach is reading the book. He's just being annoying. I'm like, well, hold on. If Jon Hamm could read my book, I would be pretty interested in that. For memoirs, they typically want you to read your book. For me, especially because I'm a personality as well, like there was kind of no doubt that I would be the one to read it.
Do you have any quick tips on noticing shame spirals and removing yourself from them? Or is it something that has to be more hard won per person?
Obviously, it's not one size fits all, but I would love to give some actionable advice. There's something about with shame is trying to look at the root of it. And usually it's someone trying to control you. It's someone trying, like, it's not that you actually feel bad. It is, whether it is, being slut shamed, for example, is a way that men control women. Being anti-LGBT, it's the way that Christianity kind of controls the masses, whatever it is. So if you're able to kind of take a step back, I think you'd be more accurately able to address it. So I think that acknowledges that your shame is not coming from you. That doesn't mean it's not real. Of course, it's extremely real, but it is coming from something else. So I think looking at the deeper root of the shame or the cause of the shame can be really helpful to kind of break some of these shame spirals that you might be having.
Do you feel a responsibility to dispel stereotypes now when you see them, or do you live up to them? And do you sometimes feel like you have the bi ambassador dilemma of, since you are so visibly out, sometimes you're not in the mood to do that kind of representation, but also have the crisis of wanting to have better representation for somebody? Or have you found a way to dispel that kind of responsibility from time to time for your own mental health?
But I think there's something to be said in terms of like bisexual stereotypes, acknowledging which stereotypes are actually bad and which are not. So bisexual people are slutty. Obviously, it's not that all bisexual people are slutty, but there's nothing wrong with being slutty, right? That's not a bad thing. Of course, you should acknowledge that not all bi people are slutty, but a lot of this comes from a root of like, oh, being slutty is a bad thing. So for me, obviously, I have a book called Boy Slut. Being slutty is not a bad thing. I'm embracing that label. So being a bisexual slutty stereotype does not bother me. Of course, people need to have nuance and understand that like my experience is my experience. It's obviously not everyone's experiences. And obviously there are plenty of bi people who are not slutty. But for me, that's not a bad stereotype because I love being slutty. Then there are some stereotypes where it's like, we are cheaters, we are liars. We are greedy. Lying and cheating is not good in any aspect of it. You know what I mean? So I think what I try to do now is kind of dispel the stereotypes that are actually negative, and the ones that are not negative, I try to, again, do that pivot to be like, I actually am this. Of course, that doesn't mean everyone else is. I don't feel an obligation, but I do like to. I don't think it is necessarily my job. I think it does help the community. And if I am in a place where I can handle this level of conflict or debate, I will happily take it on. If I'm having a rough day and not trying to prove my identity or sexuality, you should never do that, but you know what I mean? Then I'm going to let one slide, just because you have to find the balance between your, mental health and then when you're actually speaking out on behalf of the community.
All right. Final question, Zach.
All right.
Do you have any advice for those who are newly identifying as bi or queer, and or any advice you wish you could give to your younger self before you came out?
Honestly, my advice to my younger self would be to breathe and slow down. And that's not advice I'd give, again, to everyone, but it's to my younger self. I was so always go, go, go. I needed everything to be in front of me immediately. I was a very impatient person. And actually being impatient is what caused me to really struggle with my sexuality as much as I did, because I wanted to have it figured out immediately, to know exactly what I am. And I needed to have this certainty in the label, in my sexual orientation, in my identity. And when I didn't have that certainty, I couldn't just fucking breathe and relax and slow down. So I think the advice I would give myself is, in almost all aspects of your life, you can slow down and enjoy it more.